Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Jim Gazzale usually joins us here on the show on Fridays, but he's just so excited. He's got so many stories to bring us. We thought we would bring him on the midweek edition of the show. Hey, Jim, great to have you back here on NewsWire. We're going to dive into some news in Tennessee, Colorado. We'll also hit on some Maryland news as well. Thanks for coming on. Great to see you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me a few days early this week, Craig.
Or why not, is what we always say. All right, so, I find it fascinating. I saw you post this yesterday on social media that Bally Bet, who's, I don't know if it's fair to say beleaguered, but they just really haven't made any progress after being one of the first sports books to launch several years ago, have now launched in Maryland. So what's the thought process behind this? While some of the exterior sports books, fair to say, not ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are pulling out, looks like Bally Bet pushing forward a little bit in Maryland. How did this come together?
Yeah, they have, to your point, had a little bit of trouble gaining traction across the country, really. Now available in 9 markets with the launch of Bally Bet in Maryland yesterday. And like we've talked about in the last couple of weeks on the show, Craig, there's been a little bit of a market shakeup, if you will, in Maryland, where we've seen a couple of sports books leave and a couple of sports books enter the market. Superbook and Betfred recently announced that they'd be leaving the Maryland sports betting market, whereas VSC is joining or has joined the Maryland sports betting market, and Better, the micro betting platform, is expected to join the Maryland market in the coming months as well. And like I said off the top, Bally Bet joining that market yesterday. Now, when we kind of look around the country, 9 markets now for Bally Bet accepting sports wagers, a handful of them do break out operator-specific metrics. So we do have some eyes on their performance in other markets. And, their strongest market right now is Indiana, where they've earned about 1% of all market handle. That's the highest of any of the markets that we can see. Just a couple of other markets. New York, they have 0.2% of overall handle since January 2022, when that New York market opened up online. And in Ohio, interestingly enough, also 0.2% of handle there. That market, of course, opened January 23. And one interesting note out of Ohio is that Bally Bet has given out more in promos than it's made in revenue. So just a couple of, states where they're struggling to gain a foothold, gain any real traction, but they did launch in Maryland yesterday. They launched in Massachusetts recently as well. And, as we know, DraftKings, their hometown market being based in Boston, really has a tight hold at the top of that market in terms of handle. So it remains to be seen what kind of traction Bally Bet will be able to make in Massachusetts. We'll get a good idea of that in the next couple of weeks when their July revenue report comes out, probably about mid-August. We'll see Bally Bet's performance in Massachusetts. But, they're live now in 9 markets and, performing not all that great in any of them, Craig.
Yeah, no, and that's why it's sort of weird, I guess, for me to see. But look, again, some of these sports books, even though they're not doing so great, they're still trying. We got to give them credit for that. All right, so some violations and some fines given out in Tennessee. I saw this story on Legal Sports Report a few days ago, and it's pertaining, Jim, if I'm not mistaken, the fines are during soccer and pertaining to fines on specific penalties. You're going to have to tell us a little bit more about how that works. And, I sort of I guess I can kind of understand how the sportsbook operators may not have the familiarity as much, and the regulators with betting on penalties and things like that. So how did this all happen? Why did they get fined? And specifically, is it just because of them having penalties available on their sportsbook to bet on?
Yeah, that's essentially it, Craig. And, as you know, each state has kind of different approved wagers and things that customers are allowed to bet on. So in Tennessee, betting on the number of penalties given out in a soccer match is a prohibited wager. For BetMGM, that option was available to players in Tennessee. and several of them worked those bets into same-game parlays on some recent soccer matches, and Tennessee sports betting regulators slapped BetMGM with a $25,000 fine for doing so. Two other operators were fined for allowing excluded players to deposit and access their account and place bets. That was Action 24/7 and ESPN Bet. Action 24/7 was fined $18,000, and ESPN Bet had two violations that were involving excluded players. One was sending marketing materials to players on that self-exclusion list, and another was allowing a self-excluded player to access their account. And all told, those two violations cost ESPN Bet about $12,000. Now, what I found interesting was, again, just how each state sort of has the different approved and allowable bet types and things you can wager on. Tennessee also does have pretty strict fines for these violations. I've covered several other state regulatory fine stories over the last couple of months, and Tennessee's did seem to be the most expensive. And if you recall, a couple of months ago, we talked, Craig, about some Indiana sports betting violations, also involving some self-excluded players, also including BetMGM, as a matter of fact. And those were only a couple of $1,000s. So not rising to the same level of, financial, the same financial level as they are in Tennessee. But across the industry landscape, Tennessee sports betting regulators do issue probably some of the steepest penalties for these violations.
All right. Now, finally, let's cap off with maybe the biggest success story in sports betting this year from an individual state. Colorado, Jim, off the charts in terms of revenue growth. I wonder if we'll be talking about them at the end of the season.
Yeah, it was a really positive June for Colorado sportsbooks in terms of revenue. I think the biggest thing I was able to glean from the report that they put out yesterday was the simple fact that the Denver Nuggets didn't win the NBA Finals this year. $28.2 million in sports betting revenue for operators in June, and that was up from $9.2 million last June when the Denver Nuggets went all the way to the NBA Finals. And like we've talked about plenty of times over the last year, Craig, when that local team wins a championship or goes deep in the playoffs or has a big success around a high-profile event, the sports books tend to take a bath in that state, and that was the case last year in Colorado when the Nuggets won the NBA Finals. This year, the Nuggets bowed out of the playoffs in May, so the Colorado sports books were then able to enjoy a 205% boost in that monthly revenue total. Overall, basketball bets accounted for the second most betting volume in June. Despite the Nuggets not being going deep in the playoffs, baseball was number one. Parlay betting also very popular throughout the month in June, like we've seen pretty much in most markets across the country, like we talked about last week, Craig, with the Louisiana sportsbooks cashing in quite well on those parlay bets. So Colorado, a lot more of the same, Craig.
All right. Well, Jim Gazzale with us, weighing in, as he will next week. Thanks again, Jim, for coming on the show. Great to catch up with you. Thanks for the updates.
All right. Thanks, Craig.